Hello guys, this is CodeNCode and this is fifth lecture of Spring Boot backend development course. In this course, we are building backend service for basically a restaurant app, right? So in the last lecture, lecture 4, we have added certain endpoint for food item, right? So add a food item, get all of the food items, get a food item by ID and delete a food item, right? And also we have learned how you can do exception handling, right? And in the last lecture I also told you this is not the proper way to handle exceptions. Spring provides a better way to do the same using exception handlers or controller advices, which we are going to learn in this lecture, right? So basically the controller should be only responsible for the business logic, which is this part, not the part of handling the exception, right? So that would make the code look much cleaner, right? And also we'll have a central place where we will be handling all of the exceptions. That will be your controller advices, right? So basically a Java class where you will handle all of the exception, right? So yeah, let's do that in this lecture. So all of the code changes that I'll be making in this lecture will be available in lecture 05, because this is the fifth lecture, lecture 05 branch, right? So let's create a new branch that would be lecture 05. So all of the changes that I'll make will be available here in the lecture 5. So you can just pick up lecture 04th branch and make changes yourself, whatever you want to do. And then if you want to get all of the changes from lecture 5, you can directly change the branch to lecture 05. So this way you can mess around with the code yourself and learn better, right? So let's get started with the validation part. So first of all, in here, just add a new dependency, that is Spring Boot starter validation. This dependency helps us do the validation, right? So just add this, just search on Google Spring Boot starter validation, you will get this dependency. You don't have to add the version part, because in the starter parent we have already added the version, right? Now once you have added it, just refresh the project and you're good to go. Now, so if we have a look at the entities, which has ID, name, price, creation date, and updation date, right? So when someone is trying to add a food item into the table, we are not making any validations. We are not checking whether the food item name is empty or not. We are not checking whether the price is positive or not. We are doing no checks at all, neither in the controller nor in the service. We are directly saving it, right? That should not happen. We should make certain validation. For example, the name must not be empty, the price should be positive, things like that, right? So in the entity part, you can actually add the validation because of the validation support that we have added just now. So what you can do, you can add it an annotation here, not blank, right? What it will do, it will check whether the name is blank or not. If it is blank, you can provide a message that this error should be presented to the user, right? So we can add as an error message, food item name must not be empty, right? So this is the error, it will be shown to the user. Basically when it throws an exception, this error message will be there in the exception, that item food item name must not be empty. For the price, we can add an annotation or check for positive. The price must be positive. Again, I can add a message here that food item price must be positive. All right, so these are the two checks we want to add. Now we have these two checks here for the name and for the price, but these checks are not enforced as of now. Where do we enforce it? In the controller, right? So we are receiving the food item object here, and also while deleting, right? So while deleting in the food item, you are free to use only the food item ID, and you are free to use free to pass all of the rest field empty. So of course I'm not going to enforce validation here, right? But here when we are adding a food item into the table, right? So to enforce the validation, what you do, you add @valid annotation just before the parameter, right? So now it will validate that this food item which is passed to be saved in the table is actually a valid one. If while validating, if it finds there is some error, it will throw an exception with the error messages that we have defined here, right? And when you get the exception, either you can handle it here, but as we know that is not the proper way to do it, right? Or the other way is you can handle the exception in the controller advice or exception handlers. So what we are going to do, we are going to define an exception handler for the food items. So food item exception handler. Okay, now we have food item exception handler. You can annotate it with controller advice, right? And now here you can define multiple methods to handle multiple kind of exceptions, right? So for example, at the rate exception handler, here you can define for which exception you want to you want this method to handle, which exception you want this method to handle. My bad. So whenever an exception is thrown, the exception type here is method argument not valid exception. Okay, method argument not valid exception. This exception is thrown whenever any of these validation fail, right? So we can tell, hey, I want to handle this exception here in this method. Void, you can call the method handle handle valid argument just a second, argument exception. Okay, so now as you can see, we'll get a parameter of method argument not valid exception, right? So when we are handling this exception, of course we'll get an argument of the same type, right? So once you have this, what you can do, you can handle the exception here, right? So if you look at the controller, we were handling the exception there for getting a food item, right? So here what we were doing, we were trying to get the food item. If the food item is not present, we were getting an invalid exception. Okay, that is a different exception. We'll handle that also. Okay, now for this, it will throw an exception of type method argument not valid exception. Once you have this exception, you must return it to the user, right? And let them know that some of the fields are not valid, some of the field values, right? So what you can do, you can return let me just show you. Let me just close this one. Okay, from here, first of all, you will return response entity, right? Of what? Of list of string. Because see, this exception has multiple errors, right? That is why you can call the exception ex and get all of the errors. Exception.get binding result, this is the result of the validation, and then you can get all of the errors. Once you have all of the errors, you can get messages for each of them. Just a second, not for the first one, I'm going to get the result, basically error message of each of the exceptions. So what I can do, ex.get all errors. Once I have all of the errors, what I can do, for each error I can add it into a list of errors and then return that. So what I'm going to do, let's define a list of errors. So this is all of the errors. As of now, this will be empty. I'll get all of the errors from this object which has all of the error messages, and one by one add it in here and return it, right? So for each error, what I'm going to do, instead of printing it, I'm adding it to errors dot add error dot get default message, right? I think there is an extra, yeah. So error but never queried, yeah, it will be queried. From here I can return new response entity with all of the errors and with the status code bad request. So what we are doing here, first of all, this object contains all of the error messages, and for each error messages we are going through the for each loop. So using get all errors, you will get a list of errors and you can apply for each loop there. So for each error, right, what I'm doing now, I'm getting the default message, which is basically the messages that we have added, right? These messages, right? So for each message, what I'm going to do, I'm getting the default message and adding into the list of error, which is this, and then I'm returning this as a response along with the status code bad request because of invalid input, right? So what will happen, how the control flows is this: whenever a request comes here, it will validate whether the food item object is valid or not. If it is not valid, an exception will be thrown of method argument not valid exception. Now, since method argument not valid exception is thrown and we are not handling it here, someone will handle it. Which will handle? Spring will check that we have defined an exception handler using controller advice, which takes care of the exception of type method argument not valid exception. So this will be executed. Once this is executed, what we'll do, we'll create a list of errors, right? Get all of the errors from the object, exception object, and save it into the error list and send back that error list with a response code bad request. So user will receive this, right? So if I show you, if I run the application and I show you the same, hopefully we don't get any error. Yeah, go back here, add food item. This is the food item that we added. Let's remove this and only add empty spaces, and let's, yeah, do that. So if I send the request, I'm getting bad request and I'm getting a list of errors, and the error says food item name must not be empty. What if I pass negative value also of the price? See, I'm getting both of the errors. The food item name must not be empty and food item price must be positive, right? So this is a proper way to handle exception using exception handlers or controller advices, right? So this is the function that will handle all of the exception that are thrown after these validations. There's one more thing in the controller. We are doing exception handling here for the exception invalid exception, right? Invalid ID exception. We can define a controller for that also. All right, so let's do that. All right, so another exception handler for invalid ID exception, right? Invalid ID exception that we have defined. And again, we'll return a response entity with a string and handle invalid ID exception. Yeah, correct name. So yeah, from here, what I'll do, as you can see, my code is being auto generated, right? So this is because I'm not using the community edition of IntelliJ. If you want this yourself, it's not free, but I have a coupon code. You can use that and you can get the professional edition for 3 months for free, right? If you want it, let me know in the comment section. I'll give you the code. All right, so yeah, what we'll do, we'll return back a response entity with HTTP status not found, because if you go back here in the controller, you see we are returning response entity with status code not found, because we are throwing this exception, what is that, invalid ID exception, when the ID is not valid. That means we didn't find the ID in the table, right? That means it is of course a not found error. That's why from here we'll return the response with not found error, not found status code, and also of course we'll send the message also, right, from the exception. And that's exactly what we are doing here, right? So this is a proper way to handle it. So once you have done it there, you don't have to handle it here. You can simply control exit here. I'm just commenting this out and do this. If you do this, you will get an error because we are not handling the exception. So you can just add it in the in the signature, right? So just add throws invalid exception because you are not handling it here, so it must throw it, right? And also you can change it here, response entity of type food item, right? Now I have only commented it out because we are going to test it. So if I'm trying to get a food item and the ID provided is not valid, I want the exception to be handled here instead of in the controller. So as you can see, let me just delete it. So as you can see how cleaner the implementation of this looks now, because the handling of the exception we are not doing here, but we have passed on to this, right? So if you run it, running successfully, and if you try to call this by ID, right? So this is the ID. If I'm right, I don't think we have anything. Yeah, we don't have anything in the table, right? Since we don't have anything in the table, no matter what ID you pass, you'll get 4 or not 4 of not found and invalid ID exception. right? See, you're getting the message along with the proper request code, a proper status code, and we are not handling the exception in the controller, but in the exception handler, which makes the code much more cleaner, right? So this way you can handle the exception, and this is the proper actually recommended way to handle the exception, because now you have a central space where you are handling all of the exception, right? And this makes your code look much cleaner, because the controller or the services have not are only handling the business logic, not the exceptions, right? So now this is basically how you handle exception in Spring Boot, and this is the proper way to do it, right? Now we are left with to add a new endpoint, that is for updating updating a food item, right? So let's go ahead and do that also. All right, so at the rate post mapping for update, right? So slash update, right? So again, so will represent will basically return not the UUID, because UUID won't change after updating the food item, but we'll return the updated food item back, right? So in the request body we'll get the food item, right? And we are also validating it, because when you're going to update a food item, its values must be valid, and that's why we must validate it, right? So when you are going to add update a food item, what you can do, food item service dot update is okay, update, here it is, I haven't made it public yet. Yeah, food item service update food item, just pass the food item, right? Are we getting any exception from here? We are getting invalid ID exception, right? Yeah, because when we are trying to update a food item, it is possible that the food item ID that the user has sent is not a valid one, so we may get invalid ID exception. So what we can do, we can basically add it here, throws invalid ID exception, right? Because we are not going to handle the throw invalid ID exception here, but we have already defined an exception handler, and that will take care of it. We don't have to handle it here, as simple as that. So food item update it, just a second, it updates it, and as of now returns nothing, right? But I want to return the updated one. Updated one is this itself. But one more thing, when you're going to update it, we must change here, let's go back here in the service, we must update the updation time also, right? So here we are going to update it, right? So this is the food item that we are going to change it to. This is the updated basically food item. Before we make the update, food item dot set update date time local date dot now. So this is the time when we are updating it, right? So we must change that also. Once we are done with it, let's go ahead and return, instead of this, let's food item. One more thing, we don't have to have this try catch block, as we are already throwing it. So if I get any error, it will be thrown automatically, so I don't want to do that. I'm getting an error, did I do something wrong? Oh yeah, there's no return statement, so return food item, right? Yeah, so I'm doing this to make sure that the food item actually exists, right? I'm calling this function. This makes sure that the food item actually exists. If I'm going to update it, it must exist, right? That is the only purpose of this line. Otherwise we have the updated food item here. Once we have the updated food item, since we are going to update it, we must update its update timestamp, and that's exactly what we are doing here, right? And once we have done that, we are going to save it in the table, and then we can return the updated food item. Yeah, updated food item, right? And return is never used. Yeah, I know. So let's go back to the controller, and this will return a food item. Let's call it updated food item, right? Updated food item. I have the updated food item, and I can return it now. Return new response entity with the updated food item and HTTP status okay, that the operation is successfully performed. You might ask, we can directly return this, but again, this doesn't contain the proper update timestamp, right? It will be present here. So yeah, this way we can update it. All right, so let's run it again. As of now, we don't have any food item, so we can't update it, right? Let's go ahead and add a food item. Food item, again, fries. 69.99. If I add it, yeah, it is created. Here is the ID. Go back here, you can check the food item fries is here. As you can see, updated timestamp is null. So if I go back here, fetch the food item by ID, here it is, the details, right? And now this is to delete. Let's okay, duplicate it, and this is not 05, it should be 0. This should be 5, and it's delete food item. And this one is delete food item, and this one is again post, and this one is 6 dot update food item. All right, food item slash update, and this is a post call. In the body, we are going to provide the food item that we want to update. So we must provide the ID, name, yeah, let's keep it as it is. So let's say I'm changing it to 75. All right, yeah, if I send it now, yes, as you can see, we have gotten back, first of all, 200. okay, we have gotten back the response, and the value has changed from 69.99 to 75. And also, as you can see, we now have the updated timestamp. That is the created timestamp, and this is the updated timestamp, right? In the response, earlier it was null, now we have updated timestamp as well. So if you run here, as you can see, updated timestamp is not null anymore. So we have successfully added the update API also. And let's try this. Let's provide the price negative now, -5. If I run it, I'm getting an error that the food item price must be positive. So as you can see, we have defined the exception handler once, and for both of them, I've only added valid, and the exception handling is being done, right? I don't have to define it multiple times. I've defined only at one place. And each time, if I want validation for food item object, I can just write @valid wherever this is passed as request body, right? So yeah, this is how you can handle exception in Spring Boot. And this is also and yeah, we have also added a new endpoint for updating the food item. So this is it for this lecture. Thank you guys for watching, and until the next video drops, keep coding. Thank you.